For Creamer Media's Policy, I'm Sashni Murli. Authors John Connolly and Jennifer Rudyard join me to discuss their book, Dominion. John, Dominion is the third and last installment of the Chronicles of Invaders series. Where does this book pick up from?
Well, we have to be very careful about spoilers here because it is the concluding sequence or the concluding episode in the sequence. But basically we left one group of characters disappearing into a wormhole from which no one had ever returned before. They'd been forced into it in the course of a chase. And the Earth facing annihilation, facing colonization by a hostile force. And one of the lovely things about using wormholes and black holes is that time moves differently depending upon which end of them you're at. So the third book allows us to play games with that. So actually a group of characters who may believe that they've only been away for days suddenly emerge into a universe that is completely altered while they've been gone. And they're forced to find their way through it, and it completely throws them. So it's a book of a lot of the other books, they had a lot of action in them, but they were quite contemplative at times as well. This is very much a book of action, and characters are, they're trying to prevent essentially the annihilation of two species, and they're all drawn together. So I think it brings together everybody at the end. Everybody has a part to play.
Jennifer, how did the story for the series develop?
Well, the very first book starts with a 16-year-old alien invader. Well, she's the first child to be born on Earth after the invasion, and it's her birthday and she's a bit fed up because she's cloistered in a castle, and so she goes out exploring in disguise and nearly gets blown up by the resistance, who are resisting her people. And it goes from there. She meets a boy, a member of the resistance, who basically saves her life, and ultimately he gets arrested and she saves him in turn, and it's about their relationship, the development of their relationship, but also they're from completely opposite ends. I suppose it's a bit modern day Romeo and Juliet, although it's not really a romance, and it's all about the invasion, but then there's another invasion behind the invasion that you find out later on. It's like John said, there's spoiler alerts here. There's things that we very carefully hide and then reveal, but it develops. It starts off on Earth and ends up going to another planet basically, and there's almost like a monastery, a convent in space that's run by these hoarders of knowledge, the sisterhood, and they're very interested in knowledge, and they basically worship knowledge, and it ends up there. And then the third one we can't give away too much.
What are the underlying themes of the series?
Well, one of the interesting things about genre fiction is that it's sometimes dismissed by critics who think, well, it's not very serious. And what genre fiction often can do is sneak a lot of stuff in under the wire, under the guise of entertainment. And so, on one level, the first book, one of these books, is an exploration of terrorism and resistance in a way, because one of the terrible things about terrorism is that no terrorist thinks he's wrong. Terrorists believe that they are doing the right thing, or the wrong thing for the right reasons. And everybody has his reasons. And one of the reasons why we wrote a series of books that took the alien perspective of the aliens as much as the human beings is that we didn't want to just create one bunch of people as the enemies. We wanted to show the Illyri, when they come down, actually save humanity from itself, because the world is affected by climate change, overpopulation, and the Illyri bring their technology and say, look, we can solve these problems. But unfortunately, that's all very well as long as the people who solve your problems then go away again and let you make up new ones. They don't want you hanging around and then telling you what to do. And so it's an exploration of resistance and an exploration of tolerance between species and races, because the Illyri and humanity have a lot more in common than they think they do, and they actually have a common enemy that they haven't quite realized yet. So it's about not making those snap judgments, those value judgments about people who appear to be different from yourself and appear to have different viewpoints. And I guess as well as there are books about adolescence. Jenny, my other half, pointed out that younger men and women during adolescence, they feel like a different species, when your body's changing and it's not working the way it should, and you've got all of these confused emotions and you don't feel a part of your own family a lot of the time. So it's a way of exploring alienation, I suppose, that idea of separateness, of difference.
Tell us about the development of your characters Syl and Paul.
Well, at the beginning, Syl in particular is quite spoiled. She lives in a castle, she lives a privileged existence, but she's also a prisoner in that she's not able to roam outside the castle walls for fear of being kidnapped or being killed. And there's a real hatred of the invaders. And Paul is angry Paul has this rage against these people because we learn that his father died in custody. His father had a heart attack and they weren't able to get treatment in time. So he blames these others for what was done to him. So he's just filled with he just wants to hurt them. But then he encounters one of them in a kind of situation that he had never anticipated before, and he sees something in her that's not dissimilar to himself. And so they're forced to kind of accept, each has to accept the place of the other in the world, and by extension to accept the place of the other species in the world. It is a book about tolerance.
What was the writing process for this series, a science fiction series with 2 authors?
It was very difficult, I think, because John is obviously a published writer many times, and I've done journalism and copywriting for many years and written in my own time, but nothing published. And so John came to me with the idea that he wanted to write a book about the first alien child born on Earth after an invasion, and he said he needed a bit of help because, as he famously says, he doesn't know much about 16-year-old girls, and at the age of 48 shouldn't, and definitely didn't even when he was 16. So he then wrote, that's all he told me, and I said, you need to give me more, and he said, I don't know more. And so he then wrote I think about the first 10,000 words, and he wrote a synopsis and asked me then I watched a film, I can't remember what it was called.
39 Steps, sorry.
The 39 Steps, a voice from the sidelines, the wings. He wrote the 39 Steps about a chase of the Scottish Highlands, because the first book, we're not in space, we're very much on Earth, and a lot of it is a chase of the Scottish Highlands. So I then wrote what I thought he wanted and gave it back to him, and he threw his hands in the air and wept and wailed and gnashed his teeth, and then wrote more and gave it back to me, and then I went into it. So it went backwards and forwards. By the time we got to the second book, I think it was a little easier in that we both had ideas and we both had very definite sections to write. And then we put the sections together, and I think he gave his sections to me and I juggled them and then gave them back to him, and then he juggled them, and we wrote linking bits, and it became more collaborative like that, in that we both had very definite sections, and a bit more like that with the third. I think in one way it got easier because we both knew what we were doing and what was expected of us. In another, possibly harder because I got more strident and less not that I was ever pliable, let's be honest, but you know, I think I had stronger opinions about what would happen, because whereas the characters had originally been John's, I developed huge affection for them and I thought about them possibly differently. It was like we both knew them, but we both knew them differently. So I wanted to put my stamp on them, he had his. So it was an interesting, slightly terrifying experience.
John, what are the key aspects to writing a good science fiction novel?
The key aspects to writing any novel are exactly the same. It's all about character. Everything begins with character, and I think sometimes people misunderstand when they think about genre fiction. For example, I write mystery fiction. People think, oh, mystery fiction or crime fiction, that's just about plot. People generally don't read mystery novels for the plot. The plots don't change very much. It's the characters they come back for. And if you think about it, plot is what characters do. So with this book, we started with character. We started with the character of this girl in the castle. That's where you begin. You don't go mapping out a book and then try and slot everybody else into it. But science fiction has its own kind of peculiarities, because a lot of science fiction is read by younger people, because science fiction is often about being unsatisfied with the world. Science fiction, people who write science fiction generally are talking about either worlds that have gone wrong or idealized versions of the world. But they're always trying to correct something. And it often attracts people with quite strong opinions, because people who want to change the world naturally tend to gravitate either towards very far to the left or very far to the right. And I think that's one of its attractions for young people, and why it works so well for young adult readers, because they are the ones who are going to inherit this world. And I think they see in science fiction a little spark of that anger, a little spark of that desire to make things better, or to explore what will happen if we let it get worse.
And Jennifer, will you be collaborating on projects in future?
Well, John and I collaborate. Well, we live together, as we say to people, so it can be very difficult when you're collaborating and then also eating with the person sleeping next to them. As he likes to say, I haven't yet put glass in his food. So possibly, but not for a while. He's already onto something new. I'm sort of on something new as well. We did leave the ending more by accident, where it's finished, but there are new areas we could go into. There are new worlds to explore. You know, that universe hasn't closed down. In my head, it's still carrying on. You know, they're all still living their lives. They're all still very much alive for me. So I suspect it's the same for John, whether or not we do it together or separately, or I really couldn't say.
John, for fans of the series, do you think that they will be satisfied with the conclusion?
You hope so, and yet the difficulty is you don't want to give people what they expect. The worst thing you can actually do is give people what they want, because it's really what they think they want, and when they get it, they think that was what they wanted at all. So I think there is enough there that will have them thinking, yes, that this is emotionally satisfying. This does not betray my affection for the series, and it doesn't betray the characters. It's true to them. That's what you have to do at the end. But ultimately, it's a very weird thing. We're writers, and we're conscious of the fact that you have to sell books and that you have people reading them. But on some level, you create these worlds for yourself. You create them for yourself first and foremost, and you hope that what makes you happy will ultimately make readers happy. But I've been wrong in the past.
That was authors John Connolly and Jennifer Rudyard discussing their book, Dominion.